Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into something today that is, well, completely radical. We're looking at a highly controversial set of teachings that essentially attempts to entirely upend human society as we know it. Now, before we really get into the weeds here, I want to clarify something up front. 生生的所有视频和音频内容在来自于生命泉源 Lifechanyuan Manifesto. We're just here to objectively map out this manifesto. And his main argument? That 5,000 years of human history is basically a completely failed program. It's an absolutely fascinating, deeply provocative look at how radical ideologies build their case. Okay, let's dive right into this. Zhu hooks his readers immediately with this incredibly jarring thesis. He says that traditional relatives are actually your enemies. Right? He's arguing that the people society tells you to love the most, your parents, your kids, your spouse, are literally the biggest obstacles to your spiritual liberation. According to his writings, family members are an active force dragging you towards suffering, or what he calls hell, and they're actively blocking your path to heaven. It's a complete 180-degree inversion of traditional morality. Section 1, the crisis of traditional kinship. Let's see how he sets up this argument. Now take a look at the stark contrast here. On the left side, you've got the standard, everyday view of the family unit, right? A place of love, mutual support, and moral duty. But on the right, you see Xu view. He sees the family as a trap, a prison. He actually uses this incredibly chilling metaphor in the text, calling the family a boiling frog pot. He claims that anyone sitting comfortably in the warm waters of kinship is just slowly being boiled alive, completely oblivious to the fact that they're destined for spiritual destruction. And he doesn't just stop at metaphors. He goes on this rapid-fire list of grievances against parents. Xu argues that for thousands of years, parents have essentially kidnapped their children in the name of love. He claims they treat kids as private property, forcing their own unfulfilled dreams on them, selfishly relying on them for elder care, and using this manipulative mix of threats and bribes just to get them to comply. It's a relentless critique. He paints the parent-child bonds not as something nurturing, but as deeply, deeply transactional. Section 2, deconstruction using the Bible. Let's look at how he justifies this. To legitimize these really extreme claims, Xu actually points straight to the Bible. Specifically, he highlights Jesus' words in Matthew 10:36, "A man's enemies will be the members of his own household." He also brings up passages where Jesus talks about causing division between fathers and sons. Xu takes these passages completely literally. He uses them to argue that his mission to dismantle the family unit isn't some rogue, crazy idea, it's an ancient divine mandate that he's just carrying out. And that brings us to his massive theological assertion. Xu argues that he is quite literally the modern incarnation of Jesus Christ for our era. He claims his explicit purpose is to finally implement those biblical words, to actively separate children from their parents and parents from their children, all to lead humanity out of this failed historical program and into a newly constructed kingdom of God. Section 3, reframing the marital relationship. Now he turns his attention to marriage. To really hammer his point home, he points to the traditional Chinese character for marriage, which is pronounced Han. Now, this character is made up of two distinct parts, the radical for women and the character for fainting or dizzy. Xu actually argues this is proof, embedded right in divine Chinese culture itself, that marriage inherently means a woman has lost her mind. And, he adds, any man who willingly joins a dizzy woman in that union is obviously just as foolish. So he's framing marriage not as this holy, beautiful union, but as a mutual descent into total madness. Then he zooms out to build this historical argument. He looks at some of history's greatest figures and claims that their success actually required them to abandon the marital bond. He argues, if the Buddha hadn't left his wife, he wouldn't have achieved enlightenment. If Laozi had brought a wife along, he wouldn't have become an immortal sage. He even points to Christopher Columbus. He argues that these massive historical discoveries were only possible because these men weren't tethered to wives. So for Xu true greatness, whether it's spiritual or historical, demands the absolute rejection of marriage. Section 4, claims on human nature. This is where his view gets extremely cynical. He throws out this sweeping, massive statistic in his writings, 90%. He asserts that 90% of married men are walking around wearing green hats, which is a Chinese idiom that basically means they're being cheated on. And on the flip side, he claims 90% of married women live their lives being constantly surveilled by paranoid husbands. He paints marriage as this agonizing, terrible state
of either profound betrayal or suffocating control, with basically nothing in between. And to explain why he thinks this betrayal is completely inevitable, he references a really cynical old proverb: a wife is worse than a concubine, and a concubine is worse than stealing. Xu Feng uses this to argue that human nature just inherently craves the forbidden. He's saying that it doesn't matter how strict the laws are, how high your moral standards are, or even how beautiful your spouse might be. The human desire for illicit affairs is just a fundamental truth to him. He claims people will risk absolute ruin for an affair simply because it's human nature to want what is stolen. And he actually updates this theory for today's world. He argues that in the modern smartphone era, traditional marriage is literally impossible to maintain. I mean, with a phone in your hand, he notes, the opportunities for affairs are just endless. He claims that any attempt to monitor or control a spouse today is entirely futile against this unstoppable, inevitable flood of human nature that's now aided by modern tech. So he paints this highly agitated, really hopeless picture of traditional society. And then he asks the natural follow-up question: if we don't marry, if we abandon husbands and wives, where on earth do we go? Section 5, the Life Oasis Solution. Let's look at his proposed answer. He calls this final destination the Life Oasis. This is his grand new societal program. In the Life Oasis, there is absolutely no traditional marriage. There are zero traditional family structures. By completely stripping away the very relationships that he claims cause all human suffering, parents controlling kids, spouses betraying each other, he promises to build a 1,000-year heaven on earth. It's a completely restructured society, totally designed to be free of the attachments he believes hold humanity back. Xu Feng concludes this incredibly radical manifesto with a remarkably blunt ultimatum. He just rates, believe it or not, your choice. Those who believe are blessed, those who do not believe, go and verify the results yourselves. It's such a fascinating look at how a radical ideology is constructed, isn't it? You identify universal human frictions, like family arguments or infidelity. You reframe them as these massive existential crises. You tear down the entire foundation of society. And then finally, you offer your own custom-built utopia as the only escape hatch. It really leaves us with a profound question. What are people truly willing to give up in the blind pursuit of a promised paradise? Thanks so much for joining this explainer. We'll see you next time.